I'd like to welcome everybody today and thank you for joining us as we're going to talk about how we can sustain growth in devastating markets. Before we get started, I want to introduce myself. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Doug Davidoff. I'm the CEO and founder of Imagine Business Development. Over the course of the last 2 years, I've had the honor of speaking to groups of CEOs around the country to share with them thoughts about growth and also to hear firsthand about the various challenges and opportunities that lie before them. Obviously, the news of late has been quite difficult, and the markets have certainly shifted, if not from a fundamental standpoint, certainly from a news and psychological standpoint. And we put this program together in an effort to help you gain control and ensure that you'll be able to meet your growth objectives regardless of market conditions. I'd like to share today's objectives, the objectives that I have for us on the program over approximately the next 50 minutes, plus whatever question and answer time if it goes longer than that. The first objective is I want you to understand why the news is so bad today, and I think it's fair to say that the news has been extraordinarily bad of late. It's also important for us to understand that reality is rarely as bad as the news is when it's bad. The flip side of that, of course, is it's rarely as good as the news is when it's good. So the first thing I want you to understand is why the news is bad and why legitimately some companies are struggling. The second objective is I want you to understand what you need to do. Frankly, you need to do this in any market, but you especially need to do it in markets that are difficult and markets that are tough. I actually enjoy working in difficult markets because I find that difficult markets raise the stakes and they significantly punish mistakes. And that's a tremendous opportunity for those of us that are doing the right things and focus on what we call relentless execution. Of course, anything that you fail to do will be amplified in its punishment. Good markets forgive an awful lot of mistakes. Bad markets are far more difficult. The third objective is I want you to understand what you have to do now, specifically related to a market such as this. Some of what I'm going to recommend here is certainly not new. Some of it probably is. And my fourth objective is that when we hang up the phone at approximately 12:15, we know what to do and we go out and we do it. This program will be interesting and enjoyable, but if we don't act on it, it won't be valuable. So my goal is to create some value here in terms of your actions. So as you know, the program is titled Sustaining Growth in Devastating Markets. Let's identify what a devastating market is. One of the things that we have to be careful about is that the news is awfully good, the media is awfully good at making us think that markets are devastating, frankly, whether or not they're devastating. As a matter of fact, I read an article recently that reminded me of this fact, and I think it really puts everything in a great degree of perspective. It's a cover article in Time magazine, and the article is titled The Debt Bomb. Some of you may have heard me talk about this before. Never in history have so many owed so much with so little promise of repayment. At stake is a gargantuan debt held by banks, governments, and international financial institutions around the world. Much of it may never be paid off, and a major default could trigger far-reaching political and economic reactions everywhere. The global economy is sitting on a debt bomb. Now, if you're wondering why you didn't notice this article on the cover of Time magazine recently, it's because this article didn't come out recently. It was the cover of Time magazine on January 10th, 1983. And for those of us that can remember what happened in the year of 1983, you'll know that 1983 was the beginning of what is now called the secular bull market, as the stock market was up 22.5% that year and averaged greater than 20% over a 3-year period of time. So don't forget that many times when the news is at its worst, that's where opportunity presents itself. But specifically, let's take a look at what the underlying causes of a devastating market are. And I can't help but think of the movie The Perfect Storm or the book The Perfect Storm to explain what a devastating market is. What you're going to find is whether the news is good or bad, you're in a devastating market when 5 conditions are in place. The first is we see increased competition in the market. Recently, I was talking to a client of mine who competes in the construction space, and he was explaining commercial construction for short-term jobs, and he was explaining to me that it's almost impossible for him to compete. 2 years ago, when he would bid on a situation, there would be 5 to 7 competitors in there. Today, 22 competitors. The bid situation has gone from 5 to 7 to 22. When you see more and more companies competing for the same business, that's the first storm that we see. The second storm that adds to it is that there's a reduction in demand. And we're certainly seeing that in a lot of industries today. If you're in the home building industry, there's a significant reduction in demand. Now that demand can fluctuate, but when you have increased competition and reduced demand, you see accelerated pressure on the third storm, which is margin compression and margin competition. In the same situation for my client who was dealing with markets of 22 people now competing, he explained that the pricing that got put forth, the lower bids, were being bid below cost structure. And again, that's not totally unusual in a difficult market. You can see how these three trends can create a devastating market. The fourth storm is increased commodity. There's increased commoditization, and there's a lack of differentiation, and people understand and see you less. They understand your value less. They don't see the compelling component of what you're doing. And then the final piece that makes it a devastating market is your customers are in a downturn. Your customers are struggling. When these 5 conditions are impacting your company, you are in a devastating market. When all 5 aren't present, it's a difficult market. It's not a devastating market. So one of the things to keep in mind is that many of us may be in difficult markets, not necessarily devastating ones. The good news for this program is that the actions and the conditions that you have to take to deal with that are basically the same. So what's the solution to grow in a devastating market? And the solution may sound a little bit too simple. The reality is it is as simple as it sounds. And the solution is a maniacal focus on value creation. Now, value creation is a term that gets lots of lip service, but I found that very few people actually understand what value creation really is and what it really means. We define value creation. You are creating value when you're doing something that someone would be willing to pay more for. Here's how you know if you're creating value in your sales and marketing process. Would someone pay for a sales call? Would someone pay to get access to your marketing materials, to your advertising? Would someone pay to hear what you have to say? Not necessarily would they buy it, but would they pay to hear what you have to say? Additionally, when you take a look at your ultimate offering, you're creating value when people are willing to pay more than they are for other alternatives. How do you create value? Well, you create value by solving problems. But solving problems is not necessarily enough to actually be in the value creation mode. So let's take a look at the universe of problems that we have. So our big circle here represents the universe of problems. And what we find is that 95% of companies out there focus their marketing, their messaging, and their efforts at the center, at the white space here in our problem universe. They focus on solving problems that customers already know and already understand. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but we call that demand fulfillment. When you're solving problems that customers are already aware of and customers already understand, you're providing a commodity service. Now, this is somewhat antithetical to traditional business because when I went to school and got my marketing degree, they taught me that my job as a marketer was to find an existing need and then to address that need. In essence, my job was to fulfill demand. Now, by the way, in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, that was enough. Today, because of commoditization, if all you're doing is solving problems that customers already know and already understand, you're not creating value. All value creation occurs when you solve problems that customers don't already know about or at least don't fully understand.